After my video about resolution, file sizes, TIFF, and JPEG compression, I got a number of follow-up questions, so I'm going to address two of them on today's episode of
Ask David Bergman.
Hey there, everybody. Welcome back. Here I am, as always, answering your photography questions. Don't forget to go to AskDavidBergman.com. Ask your own photo questions right there on the site. I just might pick it to answer on a future show. Also, if you're not already a subscriber to the Adorama YouTube channel, why the heck not? Go ahead and click that button down below. Use the little bell icon so you get notifications as soon as new photo shows come out, just for you all week long. Also, for a while, I was hosting a series of live concert photography workshops. Hopefully you can join me in the future when we're doing those again. In the meantime, I'm doing a series of workshops online. You can get more information and join me right here in the studio for that. Get more information at shootfromthepit.com. Sign up for the mailing list there, and you'll be able to join me on those. All right, let's get right to the show. A few months ago, I answered a photo question about file sizes and resolution for JPEG and TIFF files. I'm going to put a link to that video down below, but unfortunately, as photographers, we have to deal with all of these issues, right? It's not just about taking pictures. We want to get the best quality out of our images while also creating the most efficient workflow possible so we don't have to spend as much time in front of the computer. But some of these topics can really get confusing until you wrap your head around exactly how they work. One of the follow-up questions I got is sent in from Michael K, and he said, I finally started shooting RAW and I'm doing some serious editing. If I edit a file, save it as a JPEG, and then decide to tweak it a little more, do I continue my editing on the JPEG or do I have to start all over again with the RAW file? Or is it possible to continue my edits where I left off? First of all, Michael, I'm happy to hear that you're finally shooting RAW. I've been singing the praises of RAW files way back since the early days of digital photography. If you don't know, most cameras actually allow you to save the RAW data that's captured by the sensor, and that's going to give you the most control over your images. In some cases, it also allows you to pull more quality out of your files since you have more exposure latitude and bit depth and a bunch of other things that aren't captured in the that aren't saved in the JPEG or the TIFF. I'm not going to go too far down that rabbit hole, but I'm going to link to some videos below that I've done about shooting RAW. Now, Michael, you asked about editing, saving, and then reopening a file to edit it some more. Exactly how to handle this really depends on what program you're using to process your RAW files, but the concept is the same really no matter which program you use. Think of it this way. Back in the film days, you could shoot on negative film, right? After those negatives were processed, those physical negatives couldn't be changed. They were done. But you would never give someone a negative to look at. That was really worthless. It was just part of the process. Those were your master files. It's not really a picture until you make it into a print. Then it's a picture that you can do something with. So what you do is put that negative in an enlarger in the darkroom, or you'd send it out to a lab if you didn't print yourself, and you would make a print. Now you have a lot of options when your negatives were printed. You could make them, your pictures lighter or darker. You could add or remove contrast. You could even dodge or burn specific parts of the image if you wanted to lighten a face or create a vignette on the edges, for example. Now, once you went ahead and made that print, it was also done. But what if a couple years later you looked at that print and didn't like that dark vignette anymore, right? Maybe that hand of God burning technique that was popular way back when, now you look at it and you think it looks horrible. What can you do? Well, if you only have a print, you're kind of stuck, right? You could shoot a picture of that print, which is going to give you a new negative. So then you can go ahead and make a new print. But the part that you burn down really too dark is going to be tough to lighten. It's just going to kind of get gray, right? You could do a little bit with it, but it's never going to look natural like it should, right? But if you have the original negative, then you can just make a new print. Then you can change whatever you want, and it's going to look just as good as if you had done it that way the first time. You can probably guess where I'm going with this and what the analogy is here. Your RAW files are your negatives, but you don't show or deliver RAW files just like you wouldn't hang negatives on your wall. It's not really a picture until you go ahead and make a JPEG or a TIFF or some other type of delivery format. That's really what JPEG is. It's a standardized delivery format for final images. So you keep your RAW files, your negatives, right, in your computer's digital darkroom, and then you create or export JPEGs just when you need to use the picture for something, right? When you're making that JPEG, you can edit it however you want. You can make it lighter or darker, you could do vignettes, and you can do so much more than we could do in the physical darkroom. Just like a print, once you save that JPEG, it's done. And that's the file you're gonna post or you're gonna send to your clients. If you wanna re-edit the file later, like lightening those dark edges, you can try it from a JPEG that you already exported, but it's never really gonna look natural unless you're just making very slight changes like adding a watermark or something like that. Ideally, what you want to do is really go back to the original RAW file, the digital negative, so to speak, and just create a new JPEG with the changes you want. Also, every time you save a JPEG, it compresses the file just a little bit, and you're going to lose some quality. So if you reopen an already compressed JPEG, make some changes, and then recompress it again, you're degrading the image even more. Now, practically speaking, a couple of resaves, especially at low compression levels, probably won't be noticeable at all, but why even do that if you don't have to, right? It's best to manage those RAW files so you can just create a fresh new JPEG from the RAW anytime you need to re-edit. Now, the best way to manage those files so that you can do that, well, I like to use a RAW converter program that has digital asset management built in. I used Aperture for many years, but when Apple stopped development of the program, eventually I switched over to Capture One from Phase One, which I really love. Many of you are probably using Adobe Lightroom, and that's absolutely fine as well. The way all of these programs work is pretty much the same. They keep track of all your RAW files, either inside the program's own library or externally. And when you make changes, it simply remembers your settings for each image, right? So it keeps track of all of this stuff. That's called a non-destructive workflow because it doesn't actually make changes to the RAW file itself. It simply uses the settings that you've picked to generate the image when you export a JPEG. So whenever you want to go back and do more edits, all you do is just open up Capture One or Lightroom, make the changes to that image, and then go ahead and export a new JPEG file. There's no loss in quality, just like making a new print from your original negative. Now, I'm not going to go over the process for every possible program to work with RAW files. There are just too many of them, but I'm just going to say that if you don't use something that manages your RAW files like Capture One or Lightroom, it's going to be a bit trickier and you really need to plan ahead. You absolutely can use Photoshop if you want to, but if you think you might want to re-edit the RAW file, you would use things like Smart Objects and Sidecar files so you can get back to the original RAW when you want to. Another way, what I really do is I just work on an uncompressed TIFF file as long as I know I want to keep editing. And then when I'm done with my edits, I'm going to save it out as a JPEG. On that note, I also got a related question sent in from John F. And he wants to know, I shoot RAW and have to decide on a final format. If a TIFF file is saved as a JPEG, can the JPEG then be returned back to the original TIFF format or vice versa? Now remember, John, neither of these files we're talking about are RAW files, TIFF and JPEG. So they're just like the prints after you've made your edits in your RAW conversion program. A TIFF is uncompressed, as I said in that old video, so it saves every bit and byte of your image. Those files are really big, they're huge, and I usually only save TIFFs if I'm gonna make a big print from it or just to keep my absolute best images for my archive. Of course, in addition to the original RAW file, I never throw those out. JPEG exports are fine for most images, especially at low compression levels, which are going to be higher quality files. So John, if you have a TIFF, there's no issue at all in resaving it out as a JPEG. Like I said before, that's absolutely what I would do when I'm done with my edits. JPEG really is the industry standard because they're small files and pretty much every program on the planet can read them, every photo program, every imaging program. That's what I would deliver to clients or use to post online. But really then saving a JPEG back to a TIFF, I can't think of any reason to do it once you have that JPEG done. Once you've saved it out as a JPEG, you're throwing out some of the data, right? And then if you resave that as a TIFF, it's going to save every bit and byte, but only the data that it has left after the JPEG threw some out. So just as a way oversimplified example, let's say the data in the original file is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, I'm just being simple here, right? That's the data in your image. A TIFF would save that completely as 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There's no data loss at all. Now, JPEG is going to compress the file. So let's just say, for example, it throws out the 3. Okay, so the JPEG file is now 1, 2, 4, 5. That's it. So now I could absolutely resave that as a TIFF, but it never knew that there was a 3 there. The 3's gone. It saves everything that's there. So it's still going to be 1, 2, 4, 5 in the TIFF. You're never going to get that 3 back. Now, if you go ahead and save a JPEG again, maybe this time it drops to 2, right? So now the new JPEG is only 145. If you saved that as a TIFF, it would still be just 145. So that's obviously not how JPEG compression works, but that should give you a good idea of what happens when you go back and forth from JPEG and TIFF and then start recompressing JPEGs over and over again. I hope that helps clarify some of the issues when working on JPEG files. Really, remember that you want to treat your RAW files like original negatives. Do as much of your editing as you can in your RAW conversion process, and then just export a JPEG when you need to use that file for display or delivery. Thanks so much for joining me. I appreciate it. Again, AskDavidBergman.com is where you go to ask your own photo questions. If you like this video, go ahead and use the little like button down below. You can comment. I'm going to be in the comments as much as I can to answer your questions and go back and forth, and I hope you're already a subscriber. I have a new episode. I'm back here every Monday, 10 a.m. Eastern on Adorama TV. I hope to see you back here next week on Ask David Bergman.